Let me ask you a question. What kind of gameplay do you enjoy? Do you enjoy fast, 3D combat, a bullet hell shmup, a 2D side-scrolling platformer, an isometric action RPG, an atmospheric walking sim, a choose-your-own-adventure game? What about features? Do you like New Game Plus? How about a compelling story with multiple endings? Lots of quests and loot, an enticing world, stellar music, great voice acting? Well, how about all of it? This is Nier, or at least this is Nier Gestalt for the PlayStation 3, released in 2010. This game is part of a growing timeline of games known as the Nier Drakengard universe. You might be more familiar with Nier Automata and that android girl with a big ass that's been memed everywhere. Nier Gestalt is one of those games you hear everyone praise to high heaven for its story, but you never really know why until you play it, which is what I did. I played through Nier and its sister game, Drakengard 1, and today I want to talk about both of them, because Nier in particular is an amazing game that is worth checking out. Nier has gotten a strong reputation over the last decade for being one of the best story-driven games on the 7th generation of consoles. Like the other games in the Nier Drakengard universe, it didn't do too well outside of Japan, and it was really just shoved under the rug when it came to marketing outside of Japan. And I blame the poor sales of Nier mostly on its publisher, Square Enix, but also the timing. The game came out in 2010, which was an insane year for video games. Look at this list. I mean, every single one of these titles should pop out at you, and this isn't even a third of what I was able to find online. Now, Nier did get a decent release month in April, and there wasn't too much direct competition with it in that month, but it was quickly sandwiched by the upcoming release of Red Dead Redemption. And on top of that, people had already dropped $60 a month prior on another RPG, Square Enix's own Final Fantasy XIII, which obviously received so much damn attention and marketing that Nier was pretty much tossed to the wayside to be forgotten. Ironically, Nier is remembered very fondly, while Final Fantasy XIII turned out to be forgettable at best and only got worse with time, with more and more people growing contempt for it over the years. Now, before we get into Nier, I want to talk about the game's director, Yoko Taro. He's an interesting man. When it comes to game development, most of us look towards a studio, waiting for their next big release. You can't tell if you'll like a game even if it's reviewed positively sometimes, so it helps if you have a specific studio that you follow that caters to your taste, so it's easier to follow what they make, but talent moves in and out of companies in a flash, and the quality of a studio's work can fall like a rock in an instant. They could be kings one day, then the next, well, not so much. So it's not very reliable to just follow a studio. With that in mind, more and more consumers have been following and hyping up directors rather than the studios themselves. It's all about the next big game from the next big mind. This can, of course, veer off just as bad as following a studio can, because sometimes directors just decide to go insane, but sometimes a bit of insanity can make the end product distinct and it gives notoriety to the director. With this in mind, we have Yoko Taro. When someone tells me to play a Yoko Taro game, I know I'm in for some shit. Nier and Drakengard are products of that director mentality. If it wasn't for the director's notoriety, I would never have tried them or even attempted to get past the first few hours of the game, because the gameplay might not be up to snuff. I haven't played Automata yet, but I have played some of his other games, and I can say that Nier Gestalt suffers from the fewest problems and is the best game to start this universe with. Nier Gestalt is an amazing game. I finished it recently, and it's a real treasure. It's got its problems, but I can dismiss most of them because above all else, you can feel that the people who made Nier really cared about it and wanted you to enjoy it. And it all begins with the game's amazing opening, which is just insanely good for what it sets up. And you should actually play it for yourselves. I'm only going to have a little bit of clips here just to show you what you're in for. So the game starts you out as a dad trying to protect his sick daughter from these unknown entities. you get the feeling that already something horrible is going to happen, and it kind of does. Your character needs to draw power from this book in order to stay conscious and protect his daughter, but it seems to come at some sort of cost. After fighting off waves of enemies with some teaser power moves, this happens.
You've always been the one helping me.
Yona, what have you done?
So I wanted to...
No! Yona! Yona! We need help. We need help! Please, anyone! Help! Help us! All right.
Holy shit. Already, the game has me hooked, and this is what you can expect from Yoko Taro, but the difference here is that Nier is actually better at presenting its story and gameplay on a surface level. If you don't pull interesting stuff like this often, like this little twist at the start of the game, players will have little incentive to continue playing the game in its entirety, especially if the gameplay is anything less than exceptional, but Nier is constantly pulling you in with moments like this, with its various twists that never feel overwhelming to the player. Now, the game's pacing really helps this out, but its strength comes in its character motivations and premise, starting with the main character. You play as Nier, a father in a dying world. Your daughter is very sick, stricken with some kind of disease that everyone seems to know about, but no one knows how to cure it, and it's killed a ton of people. Meanwhile, those entities that you fought in the prologue of the game, they're called Shades, and there's more of them every day. They're getting more aggressive, and they're encroaching and wandering upon every village, it seems. In Nier, you don't play as some great descendant of a hero or the chosen one. You're just a dad hell-bent on saving his daughter in a dying world. Now, in a lesser game, the developers would often struggle between gameplay and story, and how they motivate you into completing the game, and often their decisions for game design and storytelling would clash. Take Fallout 4, for example. Your spouse is murdered in front of you, and the killer takes your baby. But there's no rush to get your baby back because you're not on a timer or anything, and you don't have an incentive to get your kid back because you have no real connection to it. It's just a MacGuffin. It's a plot point. It's just your created character's spawn. Yona is different. She's not just your daughter. She's like your little best friend. The main thing with Yona is that she's a sweet little girl that you can't help but feel sorry for. This is further amplified by not only the writing, but the performance itself. This entire game, you're pretty much fighting for Yona, right? So you have to build up this relationship between the dad and the daughter to be pretty good. And not only do you have good writing and dialogue, which I'll show in a second, but you also have amazing performances. Yona is played by Heather Hogan, and Jamison Price is playing as Papa Nier in the English version.
Dad, are you all right?
Don't worry about me. I'm fine.
That's good. Oh, look, I found this while you were gone.
A cookie? Hey, that's your favorite.
Here, we can split it, okay?
No, you take it.
Dad, no. You need to eat something.
All right. Give me the small half.
No. Come on, Dad. You're bigger than me. You have to eat to
In the beginning, you're killing yourself over protecting her. She's coughing, she hardly has any energy to even speak, she's extremely sick, and she still looks at you and says, "Hey Dad, I know I'm like half dead and things are fucked, but I found this cookie, and I want you to have it, because it's really important you stay strong for both of us. You're always working so hard to protect me." That is just so fucking sweet, man. It brings a tear to my eye. The strength of the characters and the relationships through the game are what really helps the story overall, and it gives it legs for those absolutely impactful moments. There are more characters that you'll encounter throughout the game. I don't want to get too much into them, mainly because they'll make the video even longer. When I make a video, especially one about a game's story, I want you to go in with as little information as possible, but also some expectations about what you're getting into. And Nier delivers an amazing story that's good even out of the gate, and only gets better as you play. You're not waiting 40 hours for things to get interesting. It's perfectly paced and well executed for the most part throughout these 17 hours or so of game that you'll be playing it for to get the first ending. The dialogue is pretty great too, as I've mentioned. This is a game made in Japan, but it dodges a lot of cheesy and cliche stuff you'd find in plenty of Japanese games and anime.
貴様てめえぶち殺してやるからねなんだとやめろまさかお前
The game has a lot of lighthearted moments too. It's not so doom and gloom, honestly, and just about suffering. There's a lot of really funny dialogue, and your companion characters that you're going to be playing the story with just bounce dialogue off each other extremely well, and they have their own place in the story. So the game has a relatable premise, great dialogue, amazing performances by the voice actors. It's a great character-driven story, but what really wraps everything up in a nice little bow is the soundtrack. This soundtrack, no exaggeration, is the best orchestrated soundtrack I've ever heard, bar from maybe some like one-off single top-tier tracks from like some other games. The entire soundtrack is amazing. When you have a story segment hitting you really hard, and then you have that shit go Anyway, you ever cry so much you get mild dehydration? Let's move on to the gameplay. As I've said in the intro, the game is a mix of everything. Its focus is a character action RPG, but it switches things up from camera angles to even genres on the fly. If you walked in on someone playing this game on 3 separate occasions throughout the day, you'd have absolutely no fucking idea what kind of game they were playing. Some might say that these platforming segments, these isometric combat bits, these walking simulator slices, and so on, should have been cut. And that there should have been a stronger focus on making the core gameplay better, tighter combat and such. And you know what? It's no secret, I love variety in my games. It keeps my ADHD-riddled reptilian brain juiced up. But Nier's variety is what makes the game distinct. Taking out those crazy bullet hell moments or the isometric combat would leave you with a much less interesting game. I would be in the same spot as some people if I didn't like the gameplay overall, or if I loathed more than one genre of gameplay whenever the game shifted to it, but I never really did, so I never saw it necessary for the developers to have tighter focus on something like the combat in exchange for gutting out the variety. I will see the argument that these genre switches could have been done a little better for story moments, as they can sometimes feel like gameplay gimmicks. The gameplay is still fun, and the combat is still fine. It's just a bit shallow, but it is fun. In Nier, you have a variety of weapons and magical abilities to choose from and utilize. Your weapons are your typical offensive affairs. Spears, long swords, short swords, broadswords, big anime daggers, stuff like that. There aren't a lot in terms of combos, but they're fun enough to swing around and experiment with, and your character has pretty wide dodge rolls, so jumping and rolling around a fight is pretty fun. And it's not super hyper-focused on being this high-score character action game, so the developers really just didn't care too much about that. They wanted it to be a little loose, a little even, more fun and dumb. It is on the shallow side though, and you're mainly dealing with one-button combat. You do have a block and a secondary attack, depending on the weapon, but I found myself not using the block at all in favor of another magic ability. The magic system is the strong point though. You can bind magical abilities to different buttons on your controller, allowing you to carry different combinations of magic spells and using them on the fly. Some magic spells can be queued up for a massive onslaught of attacks. The more magic you have in your meter, the more you can queue up for a big, satisfying strike. Some spells are a little different though. You can hold the button down for the same attack using something like Dark Blast, firing rapid shots of magic as you hold the button down. but if you release the button after shooting long enough, you'll unleash a little flurry of magic. As for difficulty and challenge, I never had a problem with Nier, and that's mainly because I played the game on easy. I did this with Drakengard as well. Now hold on, I'm not a games journalist. I swear, I usually play on normal or the next one up if the game recommends it. But for story-driven RPGs with weaker combat systems or critically panned combat systems, I usually play on an easier setting to make the game's grinding a lot more bearable if the game is known for having substandard combat. But Nier's combat is fine. I just thought it would be bad, and you can't change the difficulty once you start playing, so I wanted to play it safe. The game isn't very challenging on easy, but it's not boring either, and that's partly because of the genre changes. Nier's magic and combat carries over very well when it shifts perspectives. Changing into an isometric bullet hell also turns your character into a twin-stick shooter with your magic abilities. It can seem gimmicky at first, but believe me, it is a lot more fun when you get into it. The game never wants you to be bored with it, and it does this without feeling desperate. But Nier is really held together by its boss fights. These are peppered throughout the game, and they're so much damn fun. They fully utilize the mechanics of the melee and magic system to make for a really fun time. The hecticness of the boss fights combined with the stellar music as you throw volleys of magic at your giant walking target, shredding through enemy projectiles with your melee weapons, hacking your way to hit the boss again, it's a real treat. If it weren't for the abundance of boss fights, I'd say Nier's gameplay is still good, but missing something. It really helps the pacing and gives the game another, hey, let's include this in the game because it's fun moment. So overall, the combat, while done better elsewhere, is still above all else fun. I wouldn't play it for the combat alone, but I gotta say, it's a relief to play a story-driven Japanese game with combat that is actually above average and really engaging. Too many RPGs. There are some really good ones, don't get me wrong. There are some really fun ones that have a great story and great gameplay, but so many of these RPGs are just too safe, too monotonous, pushing you into the menus more than the actual game for 40 hours at least, if they're merciful. Nier delivers on a much better experience, and it works for how long the game is, which is, under 20 hours. Right, so the story is amazing, the combat is pretty fun, the music is legendary, but what about the negatives? After all, this was a game that had some development issues. Well, the only specific, mandatory part of the game that I don't like is the Forest of Myth segment. And the fishing segment, but you only have to do that once. Now, the Forest of Myth, it's a part of the game where it's clear that the development studio ran into budget or time constraints, or maybe even both. You're left with some text, a few choices, and a black screen with some music droning over it. That's the whole level. It's broken up with, some walking around, but that's it. I mean, stylistically, it's kinda cool the first time. It fits with the genre switch theme, almost like a choose-your-own-adventure light, or like a text game I'd made in Visual Basic in high school. So it's not out of place, it's weird, it fits the director's, mindset, but after playing it multiple times, you start to hate it. You have to answer questions and pay attention to this story that isn't even voice acted, and the story itself just goes on and on. Forgive me for having a low attention span, but this segment clearly has cut content, and it's just padding. Even the main characters hate it and talk shit about it when you gotta go and do it a second time. Continuing on with budget constraints, Nier is not fully voice acted. I didn't mind it too much, but I can get how it can drive people insane to hear characters talking at one point and then nothing seconds later. Just flavor text, and then all of a sudden they're talking again. Thankfully, the game does have the voices when it really matters, and it matters often. But where the game really starts to fall apart is when you start playing to get each of the game's endings. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything here. You know me for that. And for what it's worth, I do think endings B, C, and D in Nier are worth playing through. But they are a bit of a slog. To understand where I'm coming from, we gotta finally talk about Nier's sister series, Drakengard. Specifically, Drakengard 1. They both take place in the same story universe, kind of, so it's only fitting we compared them. The connections between the games, you don't really need to know about them too much, and you don't really need to play like previous games in order to get others. They're designed to be standalone, but they have these weird connections to make them kind of crazy. You'll understand as you play They also have the same crazy-ass director, too, so you can kind of see where this is all going. And I just so happen to have played and finished Drakengard 1 right before ripping into Nier. Now, Drakengard 1's gameplay, unlike Nier's, is pretty indefensible. It perfectly encapsulates the phrase, play it for the story, a trademark of Yoko Taro at this point. But Nier and what I've played of Drakengard 3 have good gameplay. I mean, Drakengard 3 runs like a fat kid through an army course, but it's fun when the frame rate isn't tanking. So an emulator solves that problem immediately. Drakengard 2 is a game he didn't direct, but he had some involvement with the project, and that game was critically received in terms of gameplay much better than the first, although the story wasn't as good. And Nier Automata was co-developed by Platinum, so if their reputation is to be believed, Drakengard 1's gameplay is actually the black sheep of the franchise, in that it's the worst one here by a country mile. Drakengard 1's gameplay was probably fine for its time-ish. It was Dynasty Warriors meets Panzer Dragoon wrapped in an RPG system, but in terms of gameplay now, it's aged like milk. Ground combat feels like you're gliding on ice due to some incredibly loose weapon play. Air-to-ground combat is non-existent due to getting shot down within seconds of being in the sky. Air-to-air combat is the only fun part of the game, and even then, it's nothing special. Ground combat doesn't have the variety in terms of objectives or troop management like Dynasty Warriors has, and the air combat segments don't have the polish of Panzer Dragoon in terms of fun factor. It just comes out as a game that would be kind of alright for the time, especially for the replay value, but the game combat is just insufferable now. Some enemies take way too many hits, you have to level up your weapons, but certain weapons don't scale well, so you have to level up different weapons, but they suck ass until you level them up, and you're just going to be hitting the same enemies over and over again to level them up, and it's already a boring combat system, and you're just doing it more again and again, and a lot of the weapons are just not very fun or interesting to use, and if you level up the wrong weapon, you could get absolutely fucked in one of the game's ending boss fights. The weapon play suffers primarily from weak and wonky physics, spongy enemies, and subpar sound and visual effects when striking enemies. This is a very old PS2 game, and it shows. You have to be so damn careful because enemies constantly move in from off the screen to attack you, but the camera sucks because the field of view is limited, the dodging is slow, and the lock-on system is non-existent. It's not a fun time. Pair this with the fact that when you die, even if you almost beat the level, you get nothing. No experience points for your weapon, so you waste 30 minutes of your time. So you're faced with the worst choice in the world. Do I try and beat this level with this poorly scaled or incompatible weapon I grinded so much with, or do I take the L, go back to an early level, and mindlessly grind while listening to a podcast in a comatose state because this game is so fucking boring and dated? Fuck. If there's any reason to play Drakengard 1, it's for the story, obviously. Whereas Nier tells more of a traditional story with the relatable characters and familiar plot points that gets a little bit weird later on, Drakengard is just weird from the start, and it gets weirder. It's a fascinating game.
The Watchers do not laugh. The Watchers must not wake. La 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 la. 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 I'm just a girl. A normal girl. What's this?
This dirt! No,
But it has a ton of problems. But unlike Nier, Drakengard has much better pacing with its endings, surprisingly. Again, no spoilers, so don't worry. In Nier, you're looking at around 20 hours for the first ending, ending A, with minimal side content done. In Drakengard, you're looking at less than 10 for ending A. Both are very different games, Nier being an open-world game with quests and RPG elements, and Drakengard being a linear action game with some RPG elements sprinkled on. But Drakengard handles its pacing much better in terms of how players approach its endings. When you finish Nier on ending A, there's some extra stuff that is teased that you feel inclined to do. The problem is that Nier's gameplay perfectly comes to a close by the end of ending A, and you've got 3 more endings to go. You've experienced every mechanic. You're accustomed to your favorite spells and weapons. You've fought dozens of bosses. You've seen all the levels. What else could there be besides new story? Well, that's just it. There's nothing but some extra story, and it's paper thin. by comparison to Drakengard in just story alone, in comparison to how much game you still have to play again. The game drops you off halfway through each time you complete it, so while you're not playing the entire slog over and over again, and you can do it faster and faster, beyond the power fantasy of killing stuff quicker, there isn't really anything here for the gameplay, and that's a big problem because as much as I like Nier's gameplay, I don't like replaying it, much less replaying portion of it several times over and over like that stupid Visual Basics ass text adventure level. Nier from start to finish to ending A is paced and balanced enough so you don't get bored enough to stop playing. But without anything really new, it starts to feel tedious upon getting to ending B. And you've still got 2 more endings, and I will say that the twists of the game do add to the replay value, and this is showcased in ending B, but you're still fighting the same bosses, swinging the same swords, wielding the same magic, going to the same areas, etc., etc. Drakengard, while it is a very tedious game, at least has some new stuff, and each ending is better paced out. You play through older missions and are given different objectives, so the story ends up panning out differently in a very organic manner. It's really cool to see one ending, then go back to a level or two, do the level a bit different this time, and now you have a path to a completely different outcome. Each ending gives an hour or so of extra content, which includes new cutscenes, story, gameplay levels, but overall it gives you this motivation to keep playing and watch the game just explode open in absolute craziness. It happens at a good pace too. The game was such a chore to play through at this point, and it's just so nice that it just lets you rush through it and gives you all this new content and all this crazy story stuff and just says, hey, here you go. Have some fun. Watch this mad project just come to life. But with Nier, you're starting to stretch out that 20-hour-long RPG beyond its limits, and what you're left with is something very repetitive and arguably very tedious. Maybe that's the ultimate Yoko Taro twist. It's not the stories that are connected, but the gameplay cycle of joy and then boredom. That's not to say Drakengard doesn't have some pacing issues with its endings. Ending E in Drakengard, which Nier does not have, requires you to go back to previous levels and collect every single weapon in the game. This is a very tedious process, and it's pretty much torture without a guide, especially if you didn't enjoy the game to begin with. Even the most die-hard fans of Drakengard recommend watching Ending E online on YouTube or something. Nier has Ending C and D, which has no difference in storytelling up until the very, very end. So at the very least, you can save on a separate file and get both endings within a short time span, but you are also required to collect all the weapons too before you do any of that, which requires a lot of time and money and a guide if you don't want to shoot your head off. With all that said, Nier is still worth playing. It's worthy of its reputation, even though it really feels like the game had a lot of development problems. You can tell that the people making it tried so damn hard to get you to like it, and they succeeded. At least for me. I should mention that you don't have to play Drakengard to enjoy Nier. Nier and Drakengard are very much standalone games. In fact, I'd recommend skipping Drakengard 1 altogether. If you do want to check it out, play it after Nier, for the love of God. Nier is much easier to get into, and it's the better game. For what it's worth, I played through Ending A through D of Drakengard and watched Ending E online. I played through Ending A and B of Nier and watched Ending C and D online. Drakengard has more content for Ending E, whereas C and D for Nier play out exactly the same as it did for Ending B, minus the very, very end of the game, as I've already mentioned. I did have a desire to collect every weapon and finish the game proper for Nier, not Drakengard, but I did want to get this video out this month. I do kind of regret watching C and D on YouTube, so I'll say that it is a testament to the game that even though I found it to get tiring after the first playthrough, it's kind of nice to return to it months later when it's a little bit more fresh, and play it again at your own leisure for some new story content. But it's not the New Game Plus experience you would expect, nor is it what I wanted. But overall, I don't regret my time with Nier. It's one of the best games I've ever played. It's one of the best story-driven games I've ever played. I absolutely love this game to pieces. If you haven't played it yet, you really should. It's an amazing game. With that being said, how should you play it? You might have heard me refer to this game as Nier Gestalt and Nier. Well, that's because the localization's a little weird. So Nier Gestalt came out exclusively for the 360 in Japan in 2009. I say exclusively, it's more of a Pokemon Red and Blue scenario, except lesser. Japan got a second version of Nier released at the same time, but exclusive to the PlayStation. This version is called Nier Replicant. The only difference between these two versions is the main protagonist and the relationship to Yona. Gestalt has you play as an older character, the dad, with Yona being your daughter. In Replicant, you play as an older brother. We only got the Papa Nier version in America. Localized is just Nier. This version is the same on both the 360 and PlayStation 3. You could tell by the cover art. If you wanted to play the Japanese PS3 Replicant version that never got localized, there's a fan patch that lets you play the game in subtitle English. But for now, if you're new, I would recommend the English version of Nier. The dub is just so damn good. If Square Enix did one thing right when publishing it for American audiences, it was springing for some talented voice actors. There is a third way to play Nier, and it's why I'm making this video. Nier Replicant, again the older brother Oni-chan version, is getting both a localization and a remaster. In fact, it's more of a remaster. It's got all kinds of new content apparently coming to it. It's coming to PC, PS4, and Xbox One. It's going to have the option between Japanese and English audio, and it's looking like a total overhaul in terms of gameplay. A lot of the English version's original voice actors are actually reprising their roles, so it's going to be a brand new dub. Of course, there is the omission of Papa Nier's voice actor, Jameson Price, which is a bummer, as you're just playing as the boy character, you're not playing as the gross old man. However, as I was making this video, details were revealed not only about cut content, but also some stuff regarding the Papa Nier version, so who knows, we're just gonna have to wait till Friday. So not only is it a remaster, but also a redub, so it might be amazing, but it also could be a hell of a lot worse than the original. I have some hope for this release though. Nier deserves a good remaster, and I really hope this game isn't disappointing. Hey, if you made it this far, thank you for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you really like the video, share it, like it, whatever. YouTube likes that stuff in their algorithm. I don't make any money off these videos, so I'm just doing it for the attention, I guess. I don't know. This video took a ton of time to make. It's one of my longest videos, like damn 30 minutes in a while. That isn't a podcast, and I really appreciate the support you guys have given me over the years. Thank you for watching this video. I wanted to do a Mass Effect video after this, but I'm just so burned out from this one that I don't think I can do it. Besides, there's a Legendary Edition coming out, so maybe I should actually play that instead of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. But I already played Mass Effect 1, so I'd just be playing it again. I wanted to talk about Mass Effect 1, and then a Legendary Edition comes out, so now... so there's not enough time for me to recover from my burnout and do that. So, I don't know. We'll see, but probably not. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for checking the video out. I'll see you next time, hopefully. I'm out.